Welcome to the fifth panel. And during these wonderful days, we dealt with important topics such as human uniqueness, intimacy, human-machine interaction, narrative. And in the title of this symposium, we used the word revolution. And we discovered today, we really touched the fact that AI is really a new revolution in the human history. And because of the Copernican revolution, humanity questioned its place in the cosmos. And because of the Industrial Revolution, the issues at stake was the dignity of the human being. And at that time, Pope Leo XIII promulgated Rerum Novarum to promote human dignity and to provide criteria of discernment to defend it. And because of AI revolution, human beings are questioning now the meaning of humanity, what distinguishes our humanity, and how to preserve it. And last year, Pope Francis promulgated an encyclical on AI, Antiqua et Nova, in which he invites us to reflect on AI in every field of human life. So my impression during this day, during our symposium, is that the real problem is not AI in itself, but the reasons why we direct it toward certain uses, and the lack of a spiritual and ethical compass, and a kind of fragility of our understanding our humanity. So this panel will be focused on the contribution of the Catholic social thought as an attempt to understand the challenges of AI and to find a way to dialogue with the Chinese traditions. As in the previous panels, we are not attempting to provide solutions, but the right questions to progress in our reflections and increase our knowledge. So it is a great honor and great pleasure to introduce my panelists today, very shortly. Monsignor Renzo Pecoraro, President of the Pontifical Academy for Life, is a medical background and a great experience in the medical and bioethical fields. And today we had many opportunity to discuss medical issues and health. Father Peter La, Dean of the Faculty of Social Science at the Pontifical Gregorian University. His professional interest revolves around the issues of media ethics, social media, and the media regulation. And the Professor Tondong Baik from Fudan University in China. His research interests include Chinese philosophy and political philosophy. So, because of the previous panel focused on the narrative, I would like really recall and reconnect to it. Heidi Campbell said, how we talk about technology. This sentence, this question is very, very important. And the Guobin quoted Walter Benjamin and the Byung-Chul Han to explain the crisis of the narrative that was replaced by storytelling. The narrative is really, really important because build a meaning, while short stories are so fragmented and unable to provide a horizon of meaning. But the narrative is never neutral, and it contributes to creating an image of AI. AI producers have fascinating narratives built on communicative strategies, and the Catholic Church invites us to reflect on the complexity of this phenomenon. So, common people without expertise on AI are very confused from the variety of approaches to AI and its narratives. So my question for Peter, to reconnect with the previous panel, is what tools can ordinary people use to navigate this communication jungle? And how can church's social doctrine provide criteria for discernment?
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the organizers. I will take a few steps back and start with this image and with presenting myself a little bit. So as Deborah mentioned, my background is in media studies, and I like to always tell students that I was particularly interested in mass media, media studies, and journalism. And in the year when I defended my dissertation at Northwestern University in Chicago, journalism died. So maybe some of you had similar experience in your professional lives. You study, you devote several years of your life to something, and then technology surpasses you. And journalism died because in 2004, which is the year of my graduation, Facebook was founded. And we know that journalists and journalistic media and journalistic profession nowadays are basically irrelevant, or definitely don't drive the narrative, the public information space. Anyway, this is the image that I wanted to share with you. I wanted to start with this one because I feel at this point like I'm finding myself in a situation that my dissertation director described. You have a ton of data without theory, or in a search of theory. And this is how I feel about artificial intelligence right now. So I have a lot of ideas, but I am still struggling to get a sense or to put it into a coherent image. I start with this image before I go into the narratives. This is the image that I find relevant for two reasons. First of all, it's displayed in the Borghese Gallery here, next door to us. So it's basically our neighbor. It depicts the moment, and I apologize for Italians and Romans for banalizing this rich story. It depicts Aeneas at the moment when he left Troy and then end up founding the city of Rome. What do I find particular about this image is when I showed it at an audience in Hangzhou in China a couple months ago. It was a conference on artificial intelligence in bioethics. So when I tried to introduce or try to start by explaining what I think ethics is, I came across this image, which is, in my understanding, ethics is about what some classical philosophers also talked about, a good life or happiness. So what is good life? And this image represents 3 generations. And I think when we try to answer the question of what good life is, here are some of the key elements. So we have 3 generations: the fragile generation, the father who needs to be carried, and the father holds in his hands the images of predecessors, so the memory, the identity, the question of who we are. But it needs to be supported by the strong generation, the middle-aged generation, the son, who carries him on his shoulders. And behind them, almost hidden behind them, is the boy, so the grandson, who is kind of needs protection, who's playing, he doesn't know really where to go, and that. So we have a generation that has knowledge, has memory, and also looks ahead. If you look at the image, at the eyes, into the eyes of the father, you will see that the father looks ahead. So he's the keeper of a memory and identity, but it's the father who knows where to go. whereas the son is absorbed in the effort of walking. So he has muscles, he carries the weight, he protects, he does the walking, but it's the father who gives the direction. And the purpose of everything is the son, so the next generation, the grandson. So this kind of holistic image, when we talk about what is good or what is good life and what is happiness in life, I think these are the elements that, at least to me, help to structure a little bit this conversation about ethics, about the meaning of artificial intelligence, and then particularly in passing an ethical evaluation or judgment about specific applications. So, and if we talk in particular, let's say, I've been thinking a lot about the question of the continuity, identity, memory. You know, we heard about literature as a pattern. It's the pattern, it's the writing, it's a pattern. I like the word pattern, from which patterns of meaning, obviously, of significance. And to me, the biggest question with regard to the artificial intelligence is, what does the AI do? It sees the patterns. That's what large language models are. They look into the patterns of the data. But can they derive the meaning? Who derives the meaning out of the writing, out of the patterns? The meaning that then gives us the direction for action. Okay, it's Friday afternoon. You are not students, but still you deserve a little bit of a lighter approach, so I have some more images here. Discourses or representations of artificial intelligence or of robotics. What does it mean to be human? I like to start with this image. We all know it. It's from iRobot. So who am I? That's the question that the robot... Oh, sorry. Sorry. Thank you. Who am I? And the answer that the robot gives it himself or herself or itself, I don't know, is I am special. So, and here the ideas of the identity, uniqueness come to mind. We talked about this today. So AI should, when the AI responds, should it say I or we or... I think this is nicely represents this distinction or the difference between an individual or a sum of units or collective, which is not a community, it's a collective. And then the question of I am special, what does that mean? I am special, that usually means awareness of the difference, but also always in relation to, I am special to someone cares about me. And I think this is what we, in the realm of human life and ethics, is probably the key issue today, particularly when we apply that to the nursing, to healthcare ethics. You know, we can fix a lot of problems, but does someone really care for me? Am I really special? To whom? Can I be special to the bot or to the nursing robot? And that also means being free, being unpredictable, being fallible, being imperfect, being dirty, we will see in the next image. This is from a different science fiction movie, of which I forgot the title. But what this brings to fore is the story here behind it, that the robot went through the process of personalization. So the robot took the turn from being one among the collective to an individual in the process of taking responsibility for this chick. Now, so making oneself responsible and protecting someone. So making someone special for me. The question of not only engagement, but of commitment. caring in a deep sense. And I thought we talked a lot about these aspects. Who defines what is good for me? Can a machine do that? And I really like this, the two words, the binomio, I don't know how to say it in English, effectiveness and efficiency. I think the machines or artificial intelligence excels in the area of efficiency. But the effectiveness is what we really care about. So the effectiveness being making my life richer, better, more worth living. One aspect, again, is taking care and nurturing. There's another aspect here that I like about these images in particular. They are, we talk about intelligence, but life is so much fuller than that. So taking care of the body, of the fragility, of the whole creation, of the whole being, not just the thinking in abstract, rational terms. Okay, we had this image of a collective, which is, those of us who grew up in times of collectivism, communism, previous ones like Nazism and fascism. So the 20th century collectivism, where everything is ordered and clean and disciplined and huge masses are important, huge numbers are important. Then we have this revolution that happens in the forest when they need to defend themselves and protect the chick from the evil machines. So the distinction between collective or cooperative, I think that enters into this conversation. And then everything is interconnected and interdependent. We heard a lot about this, particularly in the encyclical Laudato Si, but also when we talk about life. So this interconnection, interdependence, where one doesn't, however, where I don't lose my specific identity. So that's the difference between collectivism and cooperative. And again, artificial intelligence, we know large language models are based on statistical agglomeration, so you lose the specific identity. We are all familiar with, okay, now we talk about the narratives. So what I don't like, or where I become very critical about it, is a common rhetorical ploy whereby whoever wants to sell me something tells me how bad my life is and then they present themselves as a solution to it. Now, here we have the image of ennui. So we are all tired, we are listless, we are bored, we are dissatisfied with a lot of things, hard work, and the artificial intelligence or any other solution presents itself as a savior, as a solution to that problem. So one of the narrative is exactly this, the machines and the artificial intelligence will free us from all these boring tasks or situations in life, from all the imperfections, from everything that is bad and evil, and will take care of us, and we end up, as maybe more clearly we can see here, this is Wall-E. This is a great, in my view, critique of the culture today. So people absorbed in their screens, fat in literal and less literal way, but living in their bubbles, being fed, being engaged. We talked about the algorithms of engagement, being fed their psychopathic images, and yeah, is that a future? in which we see ourselves. Here, the big question here is obviously that one of self-determination and agency. Who determines what is good for me? A lot of solutions that are being proposed to us make our lives easier, more comfortable, but at the cost of agency, at the cost of self-determination. Life is dirty. Life is dirty, and machines, artificial intelligence are promising us to make our lives perfect. Life is incomplete, is fragile, dirty, and maybe that's not so bad. Then we have this dystopian vision, which we haven't talked in these 2 days, at least I didn't hear much about it, but there is the real ecological cost. It's the cost to the physical, material environment that is associated with these technologies. So are we, in pursuit of our good life, are we destroying the planet that sustains us? We have this beautiful plant, which I believe speaks to several interventions that we heard in these days. So in the middle of all this destruction, there is a plant and there is a cockroach also. So the two moments of life in this cartoon, in this animated film. And what tells us, what I think they expressed very well, the authors here, is first of all that life is fragile, and the second one is that life is a gift that I give and I can receive, so it's relational. Life is taken care of, is cared for by people in a relationship between subjects, between persons. And yeah, the other image again, the interpersonal relationship. So we addressed this, we studied it, we talked about it ever since, basically in the media studies, I believe, from the beginning on. We have one of the famous titles of the book is Always Connected, you know, connected but alone, in the sense, together but alone. I think that a lot of these technology that are presenting themselves again as a solution, they are feeding on these deepest desires of being connected, being cared for, not being alone, the question of sharing. But at the end of it, it is a false solution. So it makes us less connected or less of a community. So the distinction between connection and communion. Okay, so these are my images, a little bit on the fly, but yeah, to repeat myself, these are often, it is a critical reading. I admit to that. So, because I think a lot of time when people in power, in positions of power, so it could be economic power, could be political, military power, when they try to sell their ideas and their plans to us, they tell us, first of all, they have to tell us how badly we are, and then propose a solution, but often this solution is actually not a genuine answer to the needs. It doesn't genuinely contribute to a better life. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Peter. In some way, it seems to me that AI narrative contribute on both our imaginaries on AI, but also on our perception of ourselves. And this can be sometimes dangerous. But now I would like to move to Catholic narrative, exploring the Catholic documents. We know enough well Antiqua et Nova because it is one of the most famous documents on AI from the Catholic Church. But it is not the only one official document. So I would like that Monsignor Pegoraro give us a short overview on the document, Catholic document on AI, possibly focusing on the medical field. This is your specific field of interest.
So thank you very much. We recognize that artificial intelligence is really a big challenge and a very complicated, complex issue. And it is important and positive, and I appreciate this initiative to have more dialogue, more discussion, and to see in which way it's possible to understand the questions and in which way to promote a positive approach concerning artificial intelligence. I try to present very briefly 4 contributions coming from the Catholic Church in this moment, a recent moment. One is the Rome Call for AI Ethics, promoted by the Pontifical Academy for Life and published in 2020, February, when COVID-19 was starting. And it is an interesting call with an agreement about 6 ethical principles signed by the Pontifical Academy for Life, by Microsoft, IBM, and recently Cisco, Salesforce, and probably Alibaba, we'll see. And about 120 universities and other and many religions, so the Muslim, Jewish, and 2 years ago by some leaders of Eastern religions, Shintoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. So it's a kind of platform, a framework, try to see if it is possible to have a consensus and to elaborate some proposal about that. A second document is not really a document, it is 2 contributions coming from Pope Francis. The message for the World Day of Peace, the 1st of January 2024, and the address to the G7 meeting in Italy about the topics of artificial intelligence. So in the background of this message, there are the 2 encyclicals of Pope Francis, Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. And the tradition of the Catholic teaching, in the social Catholic teaching, with some basic values and principles that could inspire and to help to define better the ethical approach to the artificial intelligence. Of course, there are some anthropological basic concepts that we recognize, but the issue is in which way from this anthropology, a special view of the human being and a special view of the society and a special view now of the creation, following this inspiration, we are able to enter the concrete challenges and to promote some values and principles that could create a consensus in this debate. Starting from a positive approach, Pope Francis, in the message that I mentioned, was saying the goal of ethical and legal regulation should not only be the prevention of harmful practice, but also the encouragement of best practice by stimulating new and creative approaches and encouraging individual or group initiative. So there are good aspects of artificial intelligence that we could recognize and to support. But on the other side, which kind of problems or risk or side effect or negative use of artificial intelligence that we need to prevent and or to define and to, if we were able to management about that. And in this positive direction, in the same message by Pope Francis, may Christian believers, followers of various religions, and men and women of goodwill work together in harmony to embrace the opportunities and confront the challenges posed by the digital revolution, and thus end on to the future generation a world of greater solidarity, justice, and peace. So artificial intelligence could be a space of dialogue among different religions and all men and women to understand in which way to support the positive practice, and on the other side, how to prevent the risk. Concerning this perspective, Pope Francis stressed the need of an ethical approach, calling algorithms, an ethics of algorithms. That is similar to the development of 50 years ago of bioethics. The idea of ethics of life, at the beginning, especially by Russell Potter, the idea of a global ethics, so including all forms of life in the planet, not only the human being. But that was the idea of interdisciplinary approach, and so put together scientists, doctors, biologists, and philosophers, theologians, psychologists, humanists, to guarantee the survival of the planet and the future, so the bridge to the future. So the idea is, what is the meaning of algorithms? And is it possible to create, to develop an ethics of artificial intelligence? That is not only, and that is a big challenge, to have some basic principles, values and principles, so this kind of platform, but if we're able to develop some ethical norms or ethical guidelines, so not immediately legal regulation, but to stress more an ethical approach and ethical responsibility, and if it is possible to cooperate about that. So for Pope Francis, it is very important, this perspective, and the possibility to respect such fundamental human values as inclusion, transparency, security, equity, privacy, and reliability. I urge the global community of nations to work together in order to adopt a binding international treaty that regulates the development and use of artificial intelligence in its many forms. So how to contribute about that? So algorithms, as a series of principles, are condensed into a global and pluralistic platform that is capable of finding support from cultures, religions, international organizations, and major corporations, which are key players in this development. So you can understand a generally encouraging approach that is possible to cooperate for the development of an algorithms about that. And of course, another important contribution is the note Antiqua et Nova of January 2025. So, in which way, but this note is concerning all the context and field of life, so healthcare, but also environment, the problem of peace and the war, and all aspects, because artificial intelligence is present everywhere, and is really pervasive of all experiences of human beings. And in this note, there is the focus on, and that is essential to emphasize the importance of moral responsibility grounded in the dignity and vocation of the human person. This guiding principle also applies to questions, the different problems concerning AI. So in this context, for the Antiqua et Nova, the ethical dimension takes on primary importance because it is people who design systems and determine the purposes for which they are used. Between a machine and a human being, only the latter is truly a moral agent, a subject of moral responsibility who exercises freedom in his or her decision and accepts their consequence. So the idea of an intrinsic relevant dignity of all human beings and the idea that only human being is a moral agent are crucial to understand this problem. Of course, now we are discussing what is a decision, if the system is able to decide or is simulating a decision. And it's not really a moral agent because in the artificial intelligence there is not good and evil, right or unjust. There is also there is no the idea of truth. So all these concepts that we apply of right, wrong, good or bad are not present in the artificial intelligence, because it's a combination very sophisticated and very complicated of logic calculation of billions of data to elaborate some proposal, but it's not really a decision. So we need also to, that is a problem of many discussions, to be more clear about the language that we use and concept that we use. For example, the issue of decision, or the decision that about repeat truth, or about what is right and wrong. And in the specific area that is becoming more and more relevant of the healthcare, medicine, healthcare, because that is one of the field of very fast development, apart the military area, of the application of artificial intelligence. In last November, it was published a statement by the Federation of International Federation of the Catholic Physicians and the Pontifical Academy for Life, try to define some principles, some criteria to use artificial intelligence in a good way, because there is an increasing application for diagnosis, prognosis, for some therapeutical aspect, and there is already a combination of artificial intelligence and robots for caring of especially the elderly people or in some situation and so on. So the issue is, what is the meaning of using artificial intelligence in the medical setting, in the clinical setting? In which way artificial intelligence can help, can support, but not change or control the decision, the medical decision, and all the aspects involved in cure and care. So there are some physicians, particularly in particular area, they have a lot of fear what is the role of artificial intelligence. If they could disappear as doctors, because they are not so relevant, that is the issue of imaging and the diagnosis of radiology and biopsies and histological issue, and so where the machine is very powerful, very accurate, and so it is difficult to understand what is specific professional role of the doctors in that setting. On the other side, it is important the relationship, and we understand that the relationship between doctor and patient is very important. But artificial intelligence is part of this relationship. What is the role of artificial intelligence? And there is a big discussion if artificial intelligence is before the evaluation and decision of the doctor or after the evaluation and decision of the doctor. Because if it is before, so the first approach is by the machine, and the final decision is the doctor, it seems logic and respectful of that kind of relationship. But on the other side, the doctor could be conditioned, could be stressed, could be influenced by the machine. That is very difficult to maintain a freedom of decision. It's very difficult, because if the machine is very sophisticated, not perfect, but is another problem of perfection, but is powerful, in which way you maintain a freedom and autonomy, or you are so influenced and so controlled by the machine that is complicated. But on the other side, there is the problem also by the patient, when the patient could also, now we are talking about a doctor Google, we could have a doctor ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, and he or she is asking the doctor if he or she confirm the diagnosis by the ChatGPT or there is a different evaluation. And there is also in the legislation, the new law of Italian government last September, that you have to inform the patient if you are using artificial intelligence, and which kind of information, which kind of consent, so a consent to the doctor or consent to the machine, and which kind of responsibility if there is a mistake, if there is a medical mistake, and in which way we could elaborate the responsibility about that. So there are, and I stop now, these principles also in this statement, transparency. That transparency is also a big problem, because many doctors, they don't understand, they don't know why the artificial intelligence is offering that proposal or that diagnosis. There is not access to the sources of. Now there are some programs that they also inform the doctor about the literature used by the machine to arrive at that decision, but not all. Also, the majority, they don't inform which algorithm they used and which literature they use. There is also the issue of access, the issue of avoid discrimination, biases. So there are several aspects that are present in medicine and healthcare that we need to recognize. So I conclude, these principles need to be incorporated into the world of AI, following also the idea, one is algorithms, and we need to create algorithms. So and the issue of ethics by design. So ethics is included in the process of creation, governance, and application of artificial intelligence, or is only at the end, the process, but by whom? So the companies, university that sign the Rome Call for AI Ethics, they sign also the issue of ethics by design. Really, they don't practice ethics by design. Now there is the discussion about Anthropic of OpenAI, but it is a strange discussion that I don't enter in some details. But it's possible to really have a dialogue. And from the Catholic perspective, it is important, this dialogue, because I repeat, there is also a positive approach about that. But to have a dialogue with the companies, with the scientific communities, the people that are building the artificial intelligence, but also the people that are training the artificial intelligence, and to include ethics in the process. And so there are systems that they stop the process, not because they decide. So the machine doesn't decide, but there is a system of algorithm inside that stop the system when there are some perspective or the use of that system is not acceptable. And really to promote the supreme value of the dignity of every human being, because there is also a problem of big discrimination or not equal approach, but that is another big problem. And the fullness of human vocation serves as a criteria of discernment for developers, owners, operators, and regulators of AI, as well as to its user. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. And sorry if I stress you a little bit, but before you leave, I would like to know more regarding the doctor-patient relationships mediated by AI, because I read articles in newspaper regarding the possibility that robots replace doctors and nurses in the assistance of patients, some kind of patients. For example, patients that can stay in their own home, but nobody in their family is able to care them. So this is a problem from my point of view, because we know that, yes, these relationships between doctors and the patients impact the success of a treatment. But at the same time, we are going in the direction in which we prefer simplify our life to make them easier, leaving away something that can be very, very important for the patients, for the family, for the community, that is the relationships. So I would like...
So sorry, but there are two different questions. One is about physician-patient relationship, but just stop a moment, because the other is about nurses and patients and the issue of care, nursing care, home care, and so. In that direction, that is a more problem of care, there is an increasing use of robots. Very sophisticated, not very expensive. I think now that with 10,000 euro, $10,000, you have a very sophisticated robots, organize everything at home. So from the blood pressure, the temperature, the control, the use of drugs, and to take care of the dog, the flowers. So is able to manage everything. It's about 10,000, 15,000, depending on which kind of a humanoid you like more. But they are Chinese, generally. But there is also fun from the United States. And now Europe is spending a lot of money in robots, because there are no perspective of artificial intelligence in Europe. So they moved in the direction of robots, try to, okay. So the combination of artificial intelligence and robots is a big challenge. And there are two different positions. One is, especially in Japan or Asia, to accept the robots at home for the elderly people, because it's a way of a good care and don't stress the family members. And with the robots, you maintain the contacts with the children, with the other people, because there is also the camera in the robots. Okay. Who can talk, and the person can have a dialogue of a lot of time with the robots, because the robots has a lot of patience. It's possible to stay together with the robots. It's like a pet, more or less. On the other, and so it is more acceptable. In some countries in Europe, they tried to analyze the problem, and there was a more negative evaluation, saying that with the robots you create more solitude and isolation of the people. They stay at home with the robots, okay, it's like a pet, but there is a risk that the members of the families are slowly more separated and make a more distance between the family and the person. So we don't know which kind of role of these robots in the hospital. They start also to use for the drugs, for some issues. It is cheaper, of course, it is cheaper. And what is the impact in the family and in the care? Could be positive aspect, but of course there are some negative or side effects. Because if you create more isolation and don't contribute to have more relationships, more communication, more dialogue, more feelings and so on, is a surrogate. So it depends on what is the meaning of surrogate. For some elderly people, we use more the animals. Dogs, cats, they are pets. There are many elderly, they stay together with the dog, but the dog is not talking, okay? So the robot is talking, and it is more cheap that of the dog because it's not eating, it's not so only electricity, and so what is the meaning of that? That we need to discuss and to see if it is possible. I maintain an open approach. If it is possible to use, but about under which kind of condition about that.
So thank you so much. More efficiency, but also more ethical questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we can now move to the Chinese perspective with Tong Dong. And I have a lot of questions for you, but starting with the first one, what is could you tell us something about the narrative, the language of AI in China?
So first, thank you for the invitation. So I'm a political philosopher. I use a lot of Chinese materials. So I don't really know too much about AI, but because of this kind of Chinese philosophy perspective, I was involved in a few AI conferences to offer this kind of perspective. One of them was in Santa Clara in the U.S., also supported by Georgetown. So thank you, Tom, for this. So I'm forced to learn a little bit about AI. So one observation I have is that. First of all, just from what I've learned, we're saying that AI will replace human beings very soon, but so far, to my very limited knowledge, artificial intelligence has no intelligence whatsoever. I think a big thing about intelligence is that like my panelists said, it's important thing about human being is the autonomy. No AI has autonomy yet, AlphaGo is just amazing, but it's very easy to defeat AlphaGo. You play Chinese chess with AlphaGo, and of course, AlphaGo can quickly learn how to do it, but then just play soccer, right? And also just maybe after AlphaGo can play soccer, you're just lying on the beach. Right, so I think that's the thing. AlphaGo is doing what the designer designs it to do, whereas we human beings can choose what we do. So autonomy is really something so far no machine can ever do. I think an American philosopher from Berkeley, Alvin Noe, put it very well. A clock doesn't know time. We look at the clock and we tell from the clock time. I think the same with AI. And so I think autonomy is something AI still doesn't have. Therefore, it doesn't have intelligence. But I mean, of course, we think autonomy is a good thing. It's a uniquely human thing, but it's not necessarily good. You know, I read something online that said that artificial intelligence has no match to human stupidity. You know, sometimes autonomy means that we make totally stupid decisions. AI never makes. So if that's the case, why we're so worried that we will be replaced? And so my own very unscientific observation is that it seems that in the West, this worry is much more prevalent than in the East Asian culture. I think if my very unscientific observation is right, I mean, for example, think about WALL-E, the kind of dystopian picture. There are a lot of dystopian movies out of Hollywood, whereas in China, Japan, so-called Confucian, civilization under Confucian influence, there are dystopian science fictions, but they're not as dominant as in the Western, popular media, and there's a very famous Chinese sci-fi writer, Liu Cixin, and one of his novels is Wandering Earth. The idea that there is kind of dystopian, the Earth is about to be swallowed up by the expanding sun, right? But it's not caused by human technological development. It's by a natural disaster, and so that's my very unscientific observation. If that holds, then why Chinese or Japanese, for that matter, are not as worried as Westerners about development of technology, AI included. I think a few speculations. One is that the East Asians or the non-Western peoples were defeated by Westerners, and their lesson is that we were defeated because we didn't develop science, modern science and modern technology. So to a lot of non-Westerners, science and technology are often considered just purely positive thing, whereas I think modern science is truly developed from the West. So there might be more reflections on the role of science. So in a way, there's a almost religious worship of science among non-Western peoples. So that's one thing. Another thing, my own speculation is that probably it sounds blasphemous. Yeah, I think among all early major civilizations, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Indian and Chinese, and later, of course, Greeks and Romans inherited a lot of things from Egyptians and Mesopotamians. Among all early major civilizations, I think the Chinese one was the only one that didn't have a creation myth. So the world was not created by gods, and until Buddhism came in, right? When Buddhism came to China, suddenly we realized that the Buddhists had all these stories. We should have something similar. So the idea of the kind of creation myth emerged. I think after the Buddhist invasion, right? Kind of intellectual invasion. Before Buddhism, early Chinese thinking, there's no creation myth, and by implication, there's no destruction myth either. So since gods did not create the world, gods could not destroy the world. We human beings we just are. We're here, and no beginning, no ending. So in that sense, I think this kind of dystopian picture is kind of alien to early Chinese civilization. Not necessarily today, but still maybe there's something culturally going on in the Chinese culture, and also. From my very limited knowledge of Christianity, we human beings are special. We're different from animals. And although when we come down to Descartes, the philosopher, we human beings are different from animals because we have a soul. And to have a soul means that we have a reason and language. And now AlphaGo seems to be able to reason, and ChatGPT can do language. Then we're screwed. I almost used the F word, but yeah. So we're being replaced, and but again, I think in the early Chinese civilization, human beings, we are what we are. We're not necessarily better. We care about other human beings, not because we're superior to those animals, but because we have this kind of a natural association. So, Confucius was once ridiculed by some hermits. The hermit said that the world is hopeless. Why do you try to run away from one bad ruler to another, trying to carry out a reform? Just give up, right? Just be one with the nature. And Confucius said that I'm a human being. I have to be associated with other fellow human beings. I cannot be associated with birds and beasts. So the idea that we are not better than birds and beasts, just as human beings, we have to be with other human beings. So maybe that's another reason. Just because there's something superhuman in terms of language and reason, it's not necessarily the end of the world, right? So be it. We are still special among us. So I guess that might be another reason. And then still, I think the worry of being replaced by AGI. On the one hand, I think it's just still a total fantasy. On the other hand, I think philosophically, it's important because it brings up the issue: what makes us human, right? When we say we're replaced by superhuman, something even better than human, I think that idea forces us to think about what makes us human. And I think that goes back to what Professor Yang said earlier in the morning. Nowadays we have the Turing test. If behind the black box, if something can do language or reasoning the way we do, then we are creating another human thing or human-like thing. But for Mencius, for the Confucian philosopher, the fundamental distinction between human beings and beasts is that we have compassion. So if Mencius designed a Turing test, he would test whether the thing behind the black box would behave in a compassionate manner. And so we will have a different understanding of when we're creating another human being than the typical Western reason language-based understanding. And then what about the threat? What if there is this AGI? Where can do everything we can do and even better, and so we talk. We have so-called the three rules of robots. All these ideas. I'm a philosopher. If you do philosophy, there's kind of the trolley problem, right? That is also mentioned, and as a result, now in philosophy there's called trolleyology, right? Because we philosophers are very good at coming up with exceptions. Whatever rules you have, we'll always have exceptions. So I think to deal with the issue of AGI, probably rules are not a good way to go. And again, I think Confucian offer alternative, namely, we learn. Human being is not a fixed thing. We learn to be human. Everyone has compassion is universal. Yet this is just a small seed. We need to develop this small seed. If you can develop it well, it just like can grow your body, you become a big person. If you can grow your moral seeds well, you become a morally big person. If you don't, you're a small person. And actually in Chinese, small person is an insult. If I say you're a small person, it means that you're 小人, you're an asshole, right? And but for Mencius, that's descriptive. If you do not develop your moral limbs, you are a morally small person. And so so the human being is not a fixed concept. It's not that we're creating a full human being. A lot of human beings are not full human beings from Mencius' perspective. If that's the case, so to be a human is a learning process. You do not give something rules and then it behaves like a human being. Rather, whatever it is, it needs to learn to be human. So maybe the best chance to regulate robots' behaviors is, if it has super intelligence and everything, it needs to grow without human beings to learn morality, human morality in this kind of human community. Of course, there's no guarantee. So I'm doing Han Fei's the legalist. A legalist, Han Fei criticized this human, Confucian idea. You want to grow a moral human being in a caring family, but if you look around, a lot of caring mothers produce terrible sons. But if you use rewards and punishments, even a slave behaves, right? So so it's not a guaranteed project, but what's the better alternative? And one thing that gives me a little bit inspiration is the story of the domestication of horses. I mentioned all these four major civilizations. One thing they have in common is that they have horses, so they can project their political powers. And horses were domestic in Eurasia, but they were probably from Americas. It's just that when human beings migrate to Americas, they knew how to hunt big animals. They didn't know how to domesticate big animals. So they killed all the horses before they could domesticate the horses. And some of the horses run to Eurasia. And the Eurasians, they evolved with the horses. So they domesticated the horses. So that there's kind of peaceful coexistence. So maybe the way to do it is, the kind of co-evolution, which is no guarantee, but maybe that's the best hope. Then one last point. So I'm thinking that just sort of this threat of AGI is really, to me, just a purely armchair philosophical exercise. And I think there are more pressing issues posed not by AGI, but by AI already. We talk about social isolation, tension, and I think as a political philosopher, I think two issues are very pressing in political philosophy. One is polarization. I think before machines are replacing blue-collar workers. And now they're replacing knowledge workers, white-collar workers, and so we see the result, right? The automation replaced so many blue-collar workers. I think that indirectly leads to the rise of Trump and the right-wing populism. And just wait until even white-collar workers are replaced. What would happen? And then people say, let's strengthen democracy. Let people decide. I'm not optimistic about that, because there is this port worker strike in the U.S. Their demand is that the companies stop using machines to replace them. But if everyone stops using machines, that's okay. But if only Americans do that, the Chinese, the Indians, the Europeans still do that, the U.S. is finished, right? And so I'm not sure, in this day of age, all these issues can be solved by this kind of democratic framework. How to solve it, I think it's tough to say. And another issue is education. Especially in the U.S., the Democrats like to say, let's re-educate, retrain our workers so that they can adapt. But what kind of education do you want to give to these people? When AI can do so many things and better. So what kind of education? And my own view is that instead of so-called creativity education, maybe we should emphasize on the basic education, algebra, calculus, because these are the things we could master and then reinvent ourselves. Any special skill will be replaced by robots, by AI. And actually, a side issue, because environmental issues are mentioned a lot, I think that's another big challenge. AI now chips are consuming so much energy in the world, so I think this is really a much more pressing ethical issue and political issue. How should we regulate this kind of thing so that we don't destroy the environment before AI takes us over. So here are some reflections.
Thank you so much. So I suppose that we can open the floor for some quick questions. with the audience. Thank you, Monsignor Pegoraro. Can we?
Yeah, well, I think I'll make the question anyway, because maybe somebody else may want to answer. So, all right, my name is Rufo Guerreschi. I lead a coalition based in Rome that is made of 10 different international coalitions, 3 from the US, 1 from China, 6 from Europe, and we are promoting a treaty on AI that will prevent extinction and immense concentration of power. So I'm in complete disagreement on basically the risks, of AI, and this is the majority of scientists' opinions. Monsignor Pegoraro mentioned the treaty proposal of Pope Francis in 2024, which called for a binding treaty, which was never mentioned afterwards. It was never mentioned in the G7, for example, speech that he gave. So my question to Mr. Pegoraro, but then to the speakers and possibly to the moderator, is how important is a treaty to make sure that algorithms actually get implemented? Because these algorithms, either you convince some of these major leaders in private meetings, or you need some kind of treaties to actually implement this ethics that you want to implement. And Antigua and Nova recognized the existential risk by the Dicastery of Culture, but it did so passingly in 2024, and not many other mentions of the extinction risk have been happening. And so it's unclear how much the church believes on the extinction risk. And now we come to Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel came to Rome with a very clear statement on one goal, warning the world and Rome and the Vatican that those calling for a global treaty to prevent extinction risk are the Antichrist or are abetting the Antichrist. This is what clearly he has stated. He has stated that in previous lectures. Nobody really believed him if you see the news, but that is exactly the game he's playing and the play game he actually has said it is. And this is something which is happening. The 63% of US voters believe that it's likely or very likely that human will lose control.
I have to interrupt you.
Yeah.
We need just
okay,
quick,
so I will get down.
Short questions and very focused.
It's 10 seconds to the question. So my question is, given this context, what is, in the stage of the game where you have this extinction risk widely recognized, the greatest power brokers of the US anyone calling for a treaty, the Antichrist, what is the church going to do about it? And does the church really believe that the extinction risk exists or not? And so I guess Mr. Pegoraro is not here, so it's going to have to be someone the closest to answer this. Thank you.
It is, I suppose it is a very big question that we cannot solve in this panel. And maybe
well, I think we have more knowledgeable and more competent people in this room than I am, so I can't really speak to that. As a priest, I believe that the church believes in Christ, not in Antichrist. So, but that's, I mean, it's a batuta. Yeah. The problem of regulation, maybe I had a thought before when I think Angel was talking about the regulation. If I stay within the theological language, I think that the original sin of a lot of problems that we have today is the 1996 U.S. Telecommunications Act, which basically the industry basically asserted itself and prevailed over politics. They made this distinction between service providers and content providers, and everything that has to do with internet and let's say we would call it today a digital was exempted from regulation in the sense journalists and whoever was a content provider, they had certain ethical and moral and normative obligations under law and regulation and the norm and acts. Whereas the internet and everything that happened on the internet eventually, so everything that was digital, was exempted from it. And this is how Facebook can get away with not doing anything about regulation on social networks, because it's a service provider. It's not a content provider. The Great Britain followed the lead of the US, and then the great time of deregulation and neoliberal globalization has led to basically today everybody's living in that environment, which is a deregulated environment, agnostic with respect to responsibilities that people, those who provide communication services, responsibilities that they ought to have towards the users, individual, but also towards the society. And I think that the same paradigm now is being applied to the artificial intelligence. Because why? Because it's digital. So everything that is digital and passes through the networks is nobody can touch it. It goes back to the 1996 Telecommunications Act.
No, actually, that example just reminds me of something. So in China now, a lot of cities and counties, they run out of money, so they need to get some money to support the bureaucracy. And one thing they do is just using that kind of thing. So a friend of mine is offering the kind of like a credit card, service kind of thing, and their company is being sued because someone is using the service to do online gambling. So now, actually, so I mean, you have one extreme like that. You have the other extreme. They're using this kind of, they're only this kind of a service provider, and they are sued in order for this county to basically just to get money out of this company that is basically not responsible for online gambling whatsoever. So so you have these two extremes, and also I guess maybe I lived in the U.S. For too long, and so I think there's also these two models, right? The U.S. actually China to that extent as well, develop first, regulate later. Mm-hmm. The Europeans are, to my very limited knowledge, just regulate first and develop later. Yeah. But then as a result, I think in terms of AI, Europeans are way behind both Americans and the Chinese. Yeah. Could that be sustained? And then one last kind of thing that just came from this is that, just with regard to your question, I mean, now Trump is in power, so he abolished all the environmental rules. Still, California still insists on fuel economy and that kind of things. So the car company, in order to sell cars in California, they still have to produce, environmentally friendly cars. And I think the same thing happens in Facebook, all these companies, because Europeans have regulations. They want to do business in Europe. As a result, they have to still comply to the European rules. So maybe the church could do something like that, because every global company has to be global, right? So they have to. So in a way, the most strict regulation becomes the universal regulation.
Thank you. Are there some questions? Or okay, we can end this session. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you to the audience. And we have a short break.